Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 29 of Upadēśa Undiyār. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, bandhavī para-sukham muṭṛavā ṟinda nilainiṭṛa lundīpaṟa, iṟai-paṇi niṭṛalā mundīpaṟa. What that means is, standing in this state, thereby experiencing supreme bliss, devoid of bondage and liberation, is standing in the service of God. Iṟai-paṇi niṭṛalā, as I'll explain in more detail, it actually has two meanings. It can mean standing in the service of God or standing as God directed. Both meanings are applicable here. But let's start at the beginning. Well, the subject of the sentence is inda nilainiṭṛa. That literally means standing in this state. Niṭṛal is a form of the verb nil, which means to stand, stop, stay, abide, continue. So it implies to be firmly established in this state. What is this state that Bhagavan is referring to? He's referring to the previous verse in which he said that he said, in the verse we talked about last time, verse 28, what he said is, Tanadu il yadu ena tan teri hil. That means if one knows what the nature of oneself is, pin, then Anadi, Ananta, Akhanda, sat-cit-ānanda. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless, limitless, or infinite. Akhanda means unbroken. And sat-cit-ānanda means existence or being, awareness, happiness. So that is what we actually are. That's our real nature. So when we know ourselves, that is what will remain. So that is what Bhagavan refers to in this verse as this state. So remaining in this state, that means the state of beginningless, endless, infinite, unbroken sat-cit-ānanda, is abiding in the service of God. And there's also an adverbial clause before iṟai-paṇi niṭṛal. The adverbial clause is bandhavī para-sukham uṭṭṛa-v-āṟu. Para-sukham uṭṭṛa-v-āṟu means experiencing supreme happiness, para-sukham. Uṭṭṛa-v-āṟu, āṟu gives a sense of in the way or in the manner. So it's abiding in this state in such a manner that one experiences supreme bliss. But this state is the state of supreme bliss. So I've taken that āṟu to mean thereby. Abiding in this state, thereby experiencing supreme bliss. And about that supreme bliss, Bhagavan says, it is bandhavī. It's devoid of bondage and liberation. This is a very important idea. So we need to understand why Bhagavan says that this state is devoid of bondage and liberation. Isn't this the state of liberation, we may think? The reason why Bhagavan says it is beyond devoid of bondage and liberation is possible only if there is bondage. But in the state in which, but in the state of, in our real state, our real nature, we are never bound. Our real nature is, as Bhagavan said, beginningless, infinite, indivisible, sat-cit-ānanda. Since it is beginningless, it's not only after we attain liberation, but we then experience sat-cit-ānanda. That is our eternal state. That is our state even now. So even when we rise as ego, our real state is just sat-cit-ānanda. Since we are eternally, since sat-cit-ānanda is what we always actually are, we have never actually been bound. So since we've never been bound, we've not actually attained liberation. That is, it is only when we rise as ego and thereby limit ourselves to the extent of a body that we seem to be bound, and that we therefore seems to be a need for liberation. But when we know what we actually are, we will know that we are ever liberated. This is clearly explained by Bhagavan in verse 39 of Upadēśa Undiyār. What Bhagavan says in verse 39 of Upadēśa Undiyār is Bhaktanan enna mate. Only so long as one, literally enna means one says, but it means that one experiences oneself, we can take it to imply here. Only so long as one experiences oneself as I am someone who is bound, bandha mukti chintanegal, thoughts of bondage and liberation. That means there can be thoughts of bondage and liberation only so long as we seem to be someone who is bound. That is, when we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as the extent of a body, and therefore we seem to be bound by so many limitations. This is not what we actually are. It's only what we seem to be. But so long as we rise as ego, this seems to be very real. So we now seem to be in bondage. That is why Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Upadēśa Undiyār, in which he explains what is ego. Ego is neither, the body is, as he says, jada udal nananadu, but insentient body does not say I. I mean, the insentient body is not aware of itself as I. Sat-cit-ānanda, sat-cit doesn't rise. But in between, one thing I rises as the extent of a body. So that I that rises and limits itself to the extent of a body, that is ego. Since it is aware of itself as I, it is not the body. And since it rises, it is not sat-cit, because the body isn't aware of itself as I, and sat-cit doesn't rise. So it's neither the body nor sat-cit, but it experiences itself as both. That is, it borrows its awareness and its existence, I am, from sat-cit, and it borrows its form from the body. So it's aware of itself as I am this body. And then he says, this is chit jada granti, not formed by the entanglement of chit. That's the sat-cit, the real awareness. And what is jada, what is not aware? That means that refers to the body. So, of course, sat-cit isn't actually bound, isn't actually entangled, but from the perspective of ego, we take that sat-cit to be ourself, and we take ourselves to be this body. So we seem to be a knot. We seem to be a knot formed by the entanglement of these two. And then Bhagavan says, this is chit-jada granti. I think the next one he says is bandham, bondage. That is the very nature of ego is bondage. So long as we rise as ego, we seem to be in bondage. So long as we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as if we were bound. And so thoughts of bondage and liberation inevitably arise, and they're quite appropriate. So long as we seem to be bound, there's a seeming need for liberation. But then he says in the next sentence of, and now back to verse 39 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Yes, 39 of Upadēśa Undiyār. In the next sentence he says, Bhaktan who is the one who is bound? Endru tande parkankal. When one sees oneself by investigating, Endru there implies by investigating who is the one who is bound. Nitta muktan tan siddhamai neka. When one remains or when one stands as siddham. Siddham means what is accomplished, or what is accomplished. It implies what is eternally accomplished. When oneself, the one who is eternally liberated, remains as accomplished, the thought of bondage will no longer be there. And since the thought of bondage is not there, will the thought of liberation remain? So bondage and liberation, they are just a dyad. They're a pair of opposites. So only so long as we seem to be in bondage, does there seem to be a need for liberation. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we have never been bound, and therefore there was never any need for liberation. As Bhagavan says, we are eternally liberated. As I say, bondage and liberation are a dyad. And as Bhagavan says in verse 9 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Irritegal, Mupadigal, Endrum, Ondru, Patri, Irrapavam. Irritegal means, we can translate it as dyad, but it's used, it has a very specific meaning here. It means pairs of opposites, such as existence, non-existence, life, death, awareness, non-awareness, knowledge, ignorance, happiness, unhappiness, bondage, liberation, all pairs of opposites, and all mupati, that's all triputi, all the three factors of any objective knowledge, the knower, what is known, and the means of knowing. All these depend on one thing. What is that one thing? As Bhagavan explained, it is ego. So the pairs of opposites exist only so long as there's ego. So only when we rise as ego, do there seem to be pairs of opposites, such as existence and non-existence, life and death, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and unhappiness, bondage and liberation. All these seem to exist only when we rise as ego. And as he goes on to say in that verse 9, of Ondru Edu, Endru Karitinul Kandal. If one sees within the mind what that one is, what that one thing is, that one thing refers to ego, they will slip off, they will depart, yes, they will slip off. Why will they slip off? Because the one thing on which they depend is ego. The nature of ego is such, so long as we are looking at anything other than ourselves, we seem to be ego. When we look at ourselves to investigate who am I, there's no such thing as ego to be found. So ego subsides and dissolves back into its source. Since everything else depends on ego, since all the dyads and triads depend upon ego, when ego subsides and dissolves back into its source, they all cease to exist. That's why Bhagavan says, Karalamave, they will slip off. So all dyads exist only so long as we rise as ego. That applies to all dyads, including this dyad of bondage and liberation. So in verse 39, when he talks about bondage and liberation, he's talking about a particular type of dyad. And this dyad, as he says, the thought of bondage and liberation, in other words, this dyad, this pair of opposites, bondage and liberation, seems to be real so long as we seem to be bound, seem to be in bondage. We seem to be in bondage only when we rise as ego. So if we investigate ourselves, ego will cease to exist, and we will then recognize that we are eternally liberated, because our own real nature is beginningless, endless, unbroken sat-cit-ānanda, as he said in verse 28. That is why he emphasizes in this verse 29 of Upadēśa Undiyār that this state of sat-cit-ānanda, which is a state of supreme happiness, para-sukham, the supreme bliss, it is devoid of bondage and liberation. So when we know what we actually are, we will see that we have never been bound. We have never been in bondage. So being in this state, of this eternally liberated state of supreme bliss, of a state of sat-cit-ānanda, being in this state is being in the service of God, or is being as enjoined by God. As I say, the verb niṭṟal, or verb niṭṛal is actually a verbal noun derived from the verb nil, which means to stand, to stay, to stop, to abide. So it implies being. Being in this state of supreme bliss, which is devoid of bondage and liberation, is being in the service of God. Why does Bhagavan say that it is... okay, let's go through bit by bit. Para-sukham. Why does he refer to it as para-sukham? Because it is the nature of this state, as he said in the previous verse, it is sat-cit-ānanda. It is not only pure being and pure awareness, it is also pure happiness. It is infinite happiness, because that is what we actually are. So the para-sukham he's referring to here is our own real nature. What we always actually are is supreme happiness, transcendent happiness, we can say, but it transcends all else. So that's why he refers to it as para-sukham. And we experience para-sukham just by being in this state, by being in the state of sat-cit-ānanda. Being in the state of sat-cit-ānanda means being sat-cit-ānanda, because sat-cit-ānanda is what we actually are. So just being as we actually are, since we ourselves are infinite happiness, being as we actually are is experiencing infinite happiness. That is the implication here. So why does Bhagavan say that being in this state is being in the service of God, or being as enjoined by God? That is the... iṛai means God. Paṇi has two meanings. It can mean service. It's also a verb, but means to order or to enjoin. So iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal can either be abiding as enjoined by God. In other words, as God instructed us, they're being thus, or abiding in the service of God. Two meanings are there. When did God tell us to be this? God appeared in the form of Bhagavan to tell us just to be as we actually are. All Bhagavan's teachings are pointing us back to know and to be what we actually are. And how do we know what we actually are? Only by being what we actually are. As he said in verse 26 of Upadēśa Undiyār, tānai iṛitale tānai aridalam. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. That means being as we actually are. Being as we actually are means not rising as ego, just being as pure being. So that is knowing ourselves. And that is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. So Bhagavan has very clearly instructed us just to be in this state of supreme happiness. What has Bhagavan taught us? Just to be happy. Bhagavan doesn't want anything from us but that we should be happy. If we abide in this state of supreme bliss, which is beginningless, endless, and infinite and ever unbroken, that is being as Bhagavan instructed us, and it is also being in his service. Why is it being in his service? In the Bhakti Marga, it is considered that the aim of life should be to be of service to God. This term actually, iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal, I think this is a term from Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy. They give a lot of importance. They consider the highest state to be the state in which you're abiding in the service of God. But does God need our service? Obviously not. God lacks nothing and needs nothing from us. In fact, who is serving whom? Are we serving God, or is he serving us? He is serving us. That everything, whatever we need, everything is provided by him. So he is providing all the material and spiritual things that we need. Well, all the material things that we want and the spiritual things that we need, he's providing everything. So he is the one who is doing service to us, but we think we are to serve him. Okay, I'll just explain the idea a bit more and then compare with some of the earlier verses in Upadēśa Undiyār. When we rise as ego, that is, when we remain as we actually are, we are not giving any trouble to God. But when we rise as ego and seem to be something separate from God, we are therefore unhappy, and therefore God has to provide, like a mother running after a naughty child, God has to come running after us, trying to save us from our own self-imposed self-ignorance. So it is necessary for God to serve us so long as we rise as ego, because we as ego, we are constantly making mistakes, and our very rising as ego is a fundamental error. So by rising as ego, we put God in a position where he needs to serve us. So how can we be of service to him? Not to trouble him, we don't rise as ego, we just remain as we actually are. We are thereby not troubling him. We are not making it necessary for God to come and serve us, to come and take care of us, to run after us like a mother or father running after a naughty child who's getting themselves in danger. If a child is about to run across the road, a busy road with so much traffic coming, the parents have to run and catch it. Like that, God is constantly coming and catching us and stopping us, getting ourselves into even more trouble than we've already got ourselves in. So, of course, God, it is only from our point of view that we can say we are troubling God. God is not actually troubled because God doesn't actually do anything. God's very nature is love. And so by just being what he is, he does everything for us. As Bhagavan says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, just like the sun which rises without Icha, Sankalpa, or Yatna, that is without liking, desire, or effort, the sun rises. And so many things happen on earth just by in the mere presence of the sun. Likewise, all the God's grace and all that God is doing for us, it's happening by the mere special nature of his presence. That is, by his mere being, he is doing everything. So he's not actually doing. That's why sometimes Bhagavan referred to saying doing without doing. That is, just by being what he actually is, because his nature is love, he does all these things for us. So we're not literally troubling him. He's not troubled by anything. But so long as it seems to us that we are dependent on God, it seems to us that we are troubling God. So how to avoid troubling God? By subsiding and remaining in our own natural state. In other words, just being as we actually are, that is not troubling God. And by not troubling God, that is the best service we can do to him. Other than this, he's not in need of any service. He doesn't need anything. We need everything from him. He doesn't need anything from us. Then why in earlier verses did Bhagavan talk as if, for example, in verse 3, Bhagavan talks about nishkarmiya karma, and he says, Kartano kakam nishkarmiya karma. That is nishkarmiya karma. That literally means nishkarmiya karma, which is done for God. So does that mean God needs our nishkarmiya karma? No. When Bhagavan says nishkarmiya karma done for God, what he implies is done for the love of God. That is, if we do action without desiring the fruit, but just for the love of God, that will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. It is not that God needs us to do nishkarmiya karma. God can do very well without any of our actions. In fact, it's because we rise as ego and thereby engage in action that it's necessary for God to be of service to us. So the best service we can do to him is not to do anything, but just to be as we actually are. And in verse 5, for example, Bhagavan says, Enuru yavam ireyuru amena Eni varipadal undīpaṛa, isan nalpusane undīpaṛa. That means worshipping, considering all the 8 forms to be forms of God is good worship of God. The 8 forms here means sun, moon, living beings, and the 5 elements. So in other words, everything that constitutes this material world, if we consider all those, everything, all the constituents of this material world, hence the whole material world itself, to be nothing but a forms of God, and worship accordingly, that is good worship. So what is the difference between what he's referring to there as good worship of God and what he refers to here as abiding in the service of God? What he's talking about here is the ultimate state. This is the true worship of God. Just to be as we actually are, that's the best worship of God. But so long as we rise as ego, take God to be something other than ourselves, we stand in need of, in order for us to surrender ourselves to God, our mind needs to be purified. As Bhagavan said in verse 3, by nishkarmiya karma, done for the love of God, or done for God, literally it means he doesn't mention love except in the Malayalam version, but it's implied. So doing a nishkarmiya karma done for God purifies the mind and shows the way to liberation. How does it purify the mind? By our directing our mind towards God in everything we do. We are stopping the mind from thinking of so many other things. To the extent we're thinking of God, we are thereby not thinking of other things. So by not thinking of other things, we are weakening the Vishaya Vasana and strengthening the Bhakti Vasana, the inclination just to love God. So that is purifying the mind. And only in a mind that is sufficiently purified will it be clear what is the way to liberation. That's why he says, we'll purify the mind and show the way to liberation. That is, the way to liberation is not doing anything. As Bhagavan says in the second verse of Upadēśa Undiyār, karma doesn't give liberation. So it's not by doing anything that we can attain liberation. It is just by being as we actually are. And how to be as we actually are? We need to attend to ourselves. Because so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we are rising as ego and nourishing and sustaining ego. So in order to bring about the dissolution of ego, we need to attend only to ourselves. When we attend to ourselves, ego will subside and we remain in the state of being. So that being in that state of being, that is the path to liberation. And we can remain in that state of being only by being self-attentive. So the path that Bhagavan has taught us, the path of self-investigation and self-surrender, this is not a path of doing, but a path of just being. And this path of just being is the only means to liberation. Because it's only in the state of bondage that action is possible. So the state of liberation is a state that transcends action. So by action, we cannot attain actionlessness. If we want to attain actionlessness, which is our real nature, we have to be actionless. In other words, we have to just be as we actually are. So, but to understand this requires a certain degree of purity of mind. That is why nishkarmiya karma is prescribed. And the nishkarmiya karma, we have 3 instruments of action: body, speech, and mind. So as Bhagavan said in verse 4, this is certain. Puja, japa, and dhyana are actions of mind, speech, and body, respectively. And in this order, each one is superior to the previous one. Superior to means it is more efficacious in purifying the mind. So in verse 5, he's talking about puja. Puja means physical worship. So what are we to worship physically? God is not actually anything physical. So how can we worship God? We can make a vigraha. We can make a linga or a form of Shiva or Krishna or Rama, and worship that form. Or since we can consider all forms to be forms of God, and worship accordingly, if we consider everything, all material forms to be forms of God, and treat them with due respect, that is, treat them as we would treat God, that with so much respect we treat everything, that is good service of God. So what Bhagavan talks about in verse 5, this is a preliminary practice for those whose minds are still too impure to recognize that God is not something other than ourselves. God is ourselves. And to know God as he is, we have to turn our attention within and just be as we actually are. So for those who are not yet ready to grasp that, by what is prescribed in verses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, these are all means of purifying the mind to bring us to the stage where we are willing to recognize that God is not something other than ourselves. God is only ourselves. And since he is only ourselves, the best way to worship him is just to attend to ourselves and thereby to be ourselves. That's why Bhagavan, after talking about saying nishkarmiya karma done for God will purify the mind and show the way to liberation, he then begins to discuss the various types of nishkarmiya karma we can do. First, we can do nishkarmiya karma by body. If we do that nishkarmiya karma, considering everything to be a form of God, that is a good worship of God. So that's action done by body. And then in the next verse, verse 6, he talks about japa, action done by speech, repeating the name of God with love. And he talks about the different forms of japa. He grades them as more or less efficacious. And then in verse 7, he talks about dhyana, meditating on God. And meditating on God without interruption is better than meditating on with the mind often getting distracted by other thoughts. But then the crucial verse is verse 8, in which he says that rather than anya-bhava, that is meditating on God as if he was something other than ourselves, ananya-bhava, meditating on him as nothing other than ourselves. And he says, ananya, avanaham ahum ananya bhava. That is the ananya bhava in which we recognize he is nothing other than I. So avan aham ahum means in which he is I. So with the understanding that God is what is shining in us as I, meditating on nothing other than I, that is ananya bhava. And that, as Bhagavan says in that verse, that is anaitinam uttamam, that is the best among all. So rather than attending to anything other than ourselves, in the name of worship of God, attending only to ourselves, that is best among all. That best among all means, because he's talking about the different means of purifying the mind, the most effective means to purify the mind is only to attend to ourselves. And to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby remain in the state of being as we actually are, as he implies in the next verse, verse 9, in which he says, Bhava balatina, by the strength of meditation. That is what type of meditation? He's referring to the meditation he spoke about in the previous verse, in other words, ananya bhava, meditating on God as nothing other than ourselves. In other words, meditating on ourself alone. So by the strength of such self-attentiveness, bhavanatita satbhava tirutale, being in the state of being, or being in our true being, which is bhavanatita, which transcends bhavana, that is parabhakti tattva. Why does Bhagavan say there that it transcends bhavana? All other types of practice, for example, in verse 5, when he spoke about considering everything to be God and worshipping accordingly, that is a bhavana. A bhavana means an imagination. It's just in the mind, but we consider everything to be God. Because actually, God is not anything other than I. But so long as we take God to be other than ourselves, yes, it's appropriate to take everything to be a form of God, but that's just a manobhavana, a bhavana, a mental. It's an imagination. It's to take everything to be God. It requires a functioning of the mind. It requires mental activity. Bhavana means meditation in the sense of mental activity. So long as we are taking everything to be God, it's the mind that is taking everything to be God. We're not actually experiencing everything as God. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 5, Ennuru yavam, all the 8 forms, iṛai-uru amena, any that means thinking that all these forms are forms of God. So it's just a mental. It's a manobhavana. It's an imagination. We are imagining everything to be God. So the true para-bhakti tattva, the true bhakti is not imagining anything to be God, just being as we actually are, in that state, and thereby remaining in our natural state of being, which is beyond all such bhavana. That is para-bhakti tattva. And how do we remain in that state of being? Only by the strength of meditation. So Bhagavan is slowly leading us from the crudest forms of worship of God to more and more refined forms. First, we take God to be something other than ourselves, so we consider all forms to be forms of God. Then better than such worship is doing japa, just repeating his name with love. And better than japa is meditation. And better than meditation on him as something other than ourselves, meditating on him as nothing other than I. That is best of all. So just being self-attentive, that is the best form of worship of God. And by the strength of that meditation, just being in our own state, in our real state of being, which transcends all bhavana, that is the para-bhakti tattva. That is the truth of supreme devotion. And then in the next verse, verse 10, he says, being in, subsiding and being in the place from which we rose. How do we subside and remain in the place from which we rose? By implication, by the strength of that meditation, by the strength of that self-attentiveness. To the extent we attend to ourselves, we thereby subside and remain in the place from which we rose. The place from which we rose is only ourself, for that is that our fundamental awareness I am. So remaining in and as that fundamental awareness I am, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. So just remaining in the state of being, that is the aim and the culmination of all forms of spiritual practice. So Bhagavan is slowly bringing us closer and closer to this state of just being. And when we remain in this state of just being, which is the state of supreme happiness, that is truly serving God. So long as we rise as ego, we think we have something to do. It seems to us that there's a world in which we need to do action. We need to do service to the world. We need to do service to other people. We need to act in order to take care of the body that we seem to be. So action seems to be necessary so long as we're looking outwards. And not only is action necessary to take care of my own body, also to serve my loved ones and to generally to do good in the world, action is necessary. Action is also necessary to worship God. So we think in that immature state. But Bhagavan is slowly leading us away from that immature state where we think we have to do something to be of service to God, to making us understand that the best service of God is not doing anything, but just being as we actually are. That is the true service of God. Whatever we may do by mind, speech, or body is not truly serving God. It may be necessary at early stage to say, yes, if you consider things to be everything to be God and worship accordingly, that's good worship of God. That is just a preliminary instruction. But the deeper instruction is doing anything is not good service of God. The true service of God, the true worship of God is not doing, but just being. So that is why Bhagavan, in this penultimate verse, the second last verse of this, Bhagavan emphasizes, because he had talked earlier about these different forms of ways of worshipping God by mind, speech, by body, speech, and mind. Here he says, what is the real way of serving God? Not to do anything by mind, speech, or body, just to be as we actually are. That is the true service of God. And when we know what we actually are, there is then nothing further to do, as Bhagavan indicates in verse 15, for example, in which he says, Manavuru Maya, that when the form of the mind is annihilated, may Mannam Ma Yogi, for the great yogi who remains permanently as the reality, Tana ko sayalile, there is not a single doing. That is, for when we remain as we actually, when ego dies or the mind is annihilated, it's just two ways of saying the same thing, we thereby remain permanently as reality, and therefore there's nothing for us to do. Our only duty is just to be, not to do anything. So when we know what we actually are and the form of mind is thereby annihilated, we remain permanently as that reality, which is just being, and therefore there's not a single thing for us to do. Why is there not a single thing for us to do? Tanil Sandanan. He has attained his natural state, his nature. So when we know what we actually are is not doing, but just being. So doing becomes, all doing ceases when we know what we actually are, when we know our real being. So the real service to God is not doing anything, but just being as we actually are. That is what Bhagavan is emphasizing here in this verse 29. So as I said, this is just being in this state of supreme bliss. How can we be in this state of supreme bliss? So long as we allow our attention to go towards anything else, we are not being, we are doing, we are rising and doing. So in order to be as we actually are, we need to cease attending to anything other than ourselves and attend only to ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent do we subside and merge back into our true being. And when we remain as true being, that is the true service to God. And that is not only abiding in service of God, it is abiding as enjoined by God. What has Bhagavan instructed us? Be as you are. Don't rise. Don't be this or that. Just be. Be I am. Be what you actually are. What am I? I am I, as Bhagavan said. So being nothing other than I, just being as we actually are, that is the true service of God. And that God who we set out to serve appeared to us in the form of Bhagavan Ramana to tell us, if you want to serve me, just stop doing anything, just be as you are. That is the true service of God. There's a lot of very deep meaning in this verse. Unfortunately, in other languages, in Sanskrit, for example, the meaning of the Sanskrit verse is something like, just get this. The Sanskrit verse, Bhagavan says, bandhamukyati tam para-sukham vindyati iha jivastu devikaha. That means the jiva devika means the divine soul, or the soul who has realized its divinity, it implies. Iha, vindati iha, experiences here, para-sukham, the supreme happiness, bandha muktatitam, that is the supreme happiness that transcends bondage and liberation, that divine soul experiences here. So the bit about transcending bondage and liberation is conveyed here, and this is the state of supreme happiness. But what is lacking here is that very important idea in Tamil, iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal, abiding in the service of God. That is not conveyed in Sanskrit. The reason Bhagavan didn't convey it is because he wrote in a smaller meter and there were no apt words that he could use. But unfortunately, even in Malayalam, which is a longer verse, even in Malayalam, he doesn't talk about iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal. Perhaps, I'm not sure why, perhaps in Malayalam, there's no such equivalent term like iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal, because in Tamil Nadu is... Tamil culture is very, very soaked in Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy, and the idea of iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal, abiding in the service of God, is a very central idea in Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy. So anyway, whatever be the reason, Bhagavan was able to express in Tamil very clearly, because the Tamil is the original. So what Bhagavan wrote in Tamil, that is his intended meaning. For some reason, he wasn't able to convey that meaning so completely and fully in any of the other three languages into which he translated this. So though it is very nice for people who know other languages, but Bhagavan translated Upadēśa Undiyār, but because he translated in verse form, he couldn't convey as fully what he has conveyed in Tamil. So the most important form of this work, though Bhagavan wrote it in 4 different languages, the original language, Tamil, in which he wrote it, is the most complete and the truest of the heart of Bhagavan. So this very important idea that, because why this is such an important idea? Because he started Upadēśa Undiyār, he started talking about karma. Karma doesn't give liberation. But if you do nishkarmiya karma, action without desire, done only for the love of God, that will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. And then he talked about various types of action that we can do for God. That is, we can do puja, japa, and dhyana. So, because he started the work like that, it is very appropriate that he ends it by saying, he doesn't directly say that is not the true worship of God, what was said in those other verses, but by implication. If we truly want to worship God, we shouldn't do puja, we shouldn't do japa, we shouldn't do dhyana. We should attend to ourselves, subside back into our heart, and remain as we actually are. That is the truest and most perfect service of God. Anything less than that is not true service of God. It is a bhavana. It is good to do so. Better than to do other actions. To worship God is good. But the best is not to do any action at all, just to be as we actually are. That is being as enjoined by God, standing as enjoined by God. Iṛai-paṇi niṭṛal, standing as enjoined by God. So being as we actually are, that is what God wants us to do, and that is the true service of God. So all these other preliminary practices that Bhagavan mentioned early in the work, in Upadēśa Undiyār, that is only for those who do not yet have sufficient clarity of mind to understand that the means to liberation and the means to serve God is just to be as we actually are. And we can be as we actually are only by attending to nothing other than ourselves, only by ananya bhava, not attending to anything other than ourselves, just attending to ourselves alone. By the strength of such meditation, we will remain in sat bhava, which transcends all this bhavana. All other practices require a certain amount of bhavana. If we're to worship a form as God, we have to consider it as God. There's a mental attitude there. If we do japa of a name of God, we have to consider that name to be God's name. God is nameless and formless, but we have to give him a name and form. It's appropriate at a certain stage, but that's all manobhavana. Even to meditate on God as something other than ourselves, if we take God to be other than ourselves and meditate on him, we're meditating either on his name or on his form. But what he actually is, God is actually nameless and formless, because he is just that pure being that transcends thought and speech. So if at all God has a name, as Bhagavan said, the true name of God is only I, or I am. And because God is nothing other than that which is always shining in our heart as I. And what are we? We are nothing other than that. So I am I. That is the heart of Bhagavan's teaching. So being the I that we actually are, in other words, being as we actually are, that is the true service of God. That is the true worship of God. So Bhagavan is leading us step by step through Upadēśa Undiyār from the most basic understanding of the bhakti marga, of worshipping God and everything, to the very highest of all understanding. But the true worship of God is just being as we actually are. Because by being as we actually are, we are not rising as ego, and therefore we are not troubling God to come running after us to pull us back and to fix us back in our own state. So the best service is just to be as we actually are. And to be as we actually are, we need to attend to ourselves. That is why all Bhagavan's teachings are focused on attending to ourselves, focused on I. Who is this I? I am nothing other than I, attending only to this I. That is the way to be as we actually are. And by being as we actually are, that is truly worshipping God. That is truly doing service to God. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Thank you, Michael. In this concept, looking at it through the lens of the three gunas, one thing that comes to my mind is Sri Krishna in Srimad Bhagavatam, sort of thing, the Uddhava Gita, he says, first you kill Rajas and Tamas with Sattva, and then Sattva has to kill Sattva to proceed to the next step, and that the third piece also has to go away. The Sattva also has to go.
Yes.
Another thing that came to my mind is it's actually a story of Ramakrishna, which you told me, where there are like these three thieves, or somebody is in the forest, and one would try to kill him, the other one would try to release him, and the third person actually takes him out of the forest up to the boundary. Do you remember that story? Could you tell that again?
Yes, that's a nice story.
Yeah, please go ahead.
What Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, talking about the three gunas, but to illustrate the nature of the three gunas, he told this story that a wayfarer was once walking through a forest, and he was attacked by three thieves, and all that he had, all his possessions, were stolen. And the first thief, the Tamas, said, let's kill him. If we kill him, then he won't be able to bear testimony against us. And the second one, Raja, said, oh no, let's not kill him. Let's just tie him up. If we tie him up, then he won't be able to run away. And then maybe he'll just die. But anyway, no concern of ours. If we tie him, we can make good our getaway, and we don't have to bother about him. The third one, Sattva, kept quiet. And he cooperated. He tied the wayfarer, and he went away with his friends. But after some time, he came back, And he untied this wayfarer and said, there's no need for that. I didn't agree with this idea of tying you. You need to return home to be with your family. And the wayfarer said, oh, but how do I'm lost now in the forest. So the sattva, the third thief, took the wayfarer to the edge of the forest and said, here is the road. From here you can proceed to your home. And then the wayfarer said, oh no, you've saved my life. Please come with me, please come home. And my family will take care of you, will honor you because you've saved my life. He said, no, I can't leave this forest. I'm a thief after all. So you have to leave me behind and go your way. So Ramakrishna told this to illustrate that all the three gunas, we need to go beyond the three gunas. That is, even the sattva guna our own nature is sometimes referred to as Suddha sattva, pure sattva, but that means it is beyond the three gunas. So long as we take sattva to be one among three, it is less than perfect. Our real nature is gunatita, beyond all gunas, beyond all these different qualities. What was the connection with this verse? Was there any particular connection you wanted me to draw with this verse?
Well, the point is that the true service of God, right? The service of God is to transcend even the sattva. And abide as a self.
Yes. Bhagavan didn't ask us to, in some place in talks, I think it's recorded, Bhagavan said, your duty is not to be this or that. Your duty is just to be. So Bhagavan didn't even ask us to be good. He said, just be. If you just be, that is the perfect state. That is beyond even good. Because good and bad are, again, it's a dyad. It's only when we rise as ego that there's this pair of opposites, good action and bad action. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 7 of Arunachashtakam, in which he says, Indraham enam nilai. So, if a thought called I does not exist, nothing else exists. Until then, until the thought called I doesn't exist, investigating to whom, to me, who am I, we turn our attention back within and merge back into our source. Then we transcend the dream, and he describes the dream that we have to transcend as Indru. It doesn't exist. Aham Puram, inside and outside. Iru Vinay, the two karmas. Here, two karmas means good action and bad action. Iral Jemmam, death and birth. Imbu Tumbu, that is happiness and unhappiness. Iral Oli, darkness and light. That can be taken as ignorance and knowledge. Ennum, Kanabu, all these pairs of opposites, they're a mere dream. So we are not even to be a good person. We need to cease being any person at all. We need to be just to be as we actually are. So we need to go beyond good and bad. If we are following this path, we still haven't totally gone beyond good and bad, but the bad qualities will drop off before the good qualities. Why is that? Because the more the mind is purified, the less selfish we will be. So the less inclination there will be to do any bad actions. So naturally, we are morally reformed, morally improved. We become a better person by following this path. But that is just a byproduct. Our aim is not to be a good person. Our aim is to be what we actually are. What we actually are is just pure being. So we need to abide in the state, abide as we actually are, be as we actually are. That is the true that is our true aim. That is what has been enjoined by God. That is what Bhagavan has instructed us. What God has instructed us, just be as you are. And that is being in his service, iṟai-paṇi niṭṛal.
Nari Puluvan is asking, do you have to do puja and japa to purify one's mind, or can you go right to dhyana?
What does Bhagavan say in verse 8? You don't even have to go to dhyana. You have to go beyond dhyana. That is what Bhagavan is saying in the early verses of Upadēśa Undiyār. He starts with puja. And he said, better than this is japa. Better than japa with a loud voice, japa done softly within the mouth. And better than japa done softly within the mouth is mental japa. This is a form of dhyana. And better than japa is dhyana. Dhyana means either meditating on a name or a form of God. But better than that, he says in the 8th verse, what is best among all is not meditating on God or not worshipping God as something other than oneself. Meditating on him as I alone, as nothing other than I, ananya bhava, avanahamaham. He is I. Since he is I, what's the best way to meditate on him? To meditate only on I. So, and that Bhagavan says, that is anaitinam uttamam. So if we are drawn to Bhagavan's path of self-investigation, none of these other practices are necessary. Puja, japa, and dhyana, they may have been necessary in the past, but once you've climbed up the stairs of a staircase, once you've reached the top, the stairs are no longer... Let the stairs be there. They'll be useful for other people. But you no longer need those stairs because you've already got to the top. So once we've come to this path of self-investigation, we no longer need all these other preliminary practices. Those are necessary so long as we take God to be other than ourselves, so long as we think we have to do something in order to attain liberation. But the truth is, no amount of doing can ever give liberation, because liberation means being as we actually are. What we actually are is not doing, but just being. So how can we attain the state of actionlessness by any action? In order to attain that state of actionlessness, we need to be actionless. We need to be as we actually are. So that's why he says in verse 8, ananya bhava, that means meditating on nothing other than I. And with the attitude, with the understanding, once we understand that God is I, we no longer need to worship any name and form. We can meditate only on I. Of course, when our mind comes outwards, we see names and forms. We see Bhagavan's name and form. We have great reverence for Bhagavan. We see the name and form of Arunachala. We have great reverence for that because Arunachala is our guru's guru. So, and of course, Bhagavan and Arunachala are one and the same. So long as we are looking outwards, it is appropriate to consider God to be a form. But the best worship of God is not looking outwards and taking him to be a form, it's looking within. That is why, what does Arunachala teach through silence? And what does Bhagavan teach through words? Tirambiyaham, turning within. Dinam tane dinamaha kankan. See yourself daily with the inner eye. Teriyam, you will know. That is the true worship of God. So we having come to Bhagavan's path, all that is required is that we should try to attend more and more keenly to I. That is the heart of Bhagavan's teachings. That is Bhagavan said, there are two ways, self-investigation and self-surrender. But though he said two ways, he also made it clear that they are actually one and the same. We cannot surrender ourselves without investigating ourselves, without attending to I. And we cannot attend to I without thereby surrendering ourselves. So surrender and vichara ultimately are one and the same thing. So the Bhagavan's path is attending to I. Arunachala mena ahameine pava ahateve rarupai arunachala. So Arunachala is that which is shining in our heart as I. By meditating upon him as I, he roots out our ego. That is the path shown by Bhagavan. So let's not even worry about, not only we can bypass puja and japa, we can bypass dhyana itself. The only dhyana we need is not dhyana on anything other than ourselves, dhyana on ourselves alone, what Bhagavan calls swarupa dhyana, which of course is just another name for self-investigation.
You said somewhere in one of the articles, self-attention is both sufficient and necessary.
Yes, yes.
Bhagavan
has made that abundantly clear.
Didn't he say that in Nanya?
Yeah, in Nanya. If you if you cling firmly to Swarupa Smarana until you attain Swarupa, uninterruptedly holding on to Swarupa Smarana, if you do that, that is alone is sufficient. Adu Andre Podam.
Right. Thank you, Michael.
When he says that is sufficient, that means that nothing else is necessary. He also says that this is necessary. For example, I mean, there's so many places he said it. For example, take verse 27 of Ulludunapadu. In verse 27 of Ulludunapadu, what he says is, Nanu diada ulla nilai, namaduvai ulla nilai. The state in which we do not rise as I, or the state in which I doesn't rise, is the state in which we are that. Nan udikum tanama adena damal. Without investigating the place where I rises, nanudia tan iṛai-paṇi sabadu evan. Who can attain that their destruction of themselves in which I does not rise? So he clearly implies here that we cannot bring about the destruction of ego without investigating ourselves. So this is necessary and it's also sufficient. So nothing else is either since this is both necessary and sufficient. Since this is necessary, nothing else, that means nothing else is sufficient. Since this is sufficient, it means nothing else is necessary. So this alone is all we need. The more we focus on this core practice taught by Bhagavan, the more that is, we can make far quicker progress in the spiritual path. Even a little effort made to attend to I will take us far further than any amount of effort in any other spiritual path. So this is the easiest spiritual path. This is the direct spiritual path. So nothing else is necessary.
Thank you, Michael.
If we're not drawn to this, if we don't feel any attracted to this, then there are so many other forms of bhakti. We can do puja, we can do japa, we can do dhyana, but that's only for people who are not attracted to this path. If we're attracted to this path, everything else becomes superfluous, unnecessary, redundant.
Right. I think that's a key point. I mean, it still plays a role for those who are not attracted.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, that's why are there so many religions? Why are there so many philosophies? Why are there so many? That is, so there has to be something suitable for everyone at different stages. We've been through all these things in the past. Why we are where we are now because of having done all these things in the past. So we shouldn't look down on these other practices.
Right.
They're necessary, but not for us. Once we have come to this path, nothing else is necessary. For those who are not attracted to this path, then all these other things are necessary.
Rabbi Day is asking a question, something we discussed. To the extent my state of self-attentiveness is not perfect, and or I have ignorance regarding my true nature, my finite mind wants to reconcile Bhagavan's teaching regarding self-abidance as true service to God with service to, true service to good, with service to God, service to humanity. In fact, on what you and Kumar do in the service of Bhagavan's devotees must be beneficial for spiritual life. So, Ravi, do you want to add, clarify that? Because I think there's a typo in there.
Yes. Sorry about the typo. What I meant, that from childhood, and we have heard from Jesus to Ramakrishna saying service to God is service to humanity. And of course, in Bhagavan's path, there is the supreme compassion comes from realizing that you are one with everything. And self-abidance is a true service to God. But we still like to reconcile. I mean, what Michael and Kumar, you do for the service of our community, the community of devotees, it also requires a lot of doing in some sense in this, be it selfless or, I mean, or in the service of, service of strengthening your self-abidance practice, but it's still, sort of, I want to understand if that is not, wasted, your efforts.
Okay, one thing you said service of God is service of humanity. I think you may have meant it the other way around, but since you said it that way, that's a nice point to catch you on. What is the service of, according to Bhagavan, the true service of God is only being as we actually are. Since that is service of God, and since there's no humanity other than God, that is service of humanity. So yes, the being as we actually are, that is not only service of God, that's also service of the entire world. Because what is the world other than God? You also said, yes, everything is God. So if everything is God, let's worship, let's serve God. How to serve God? By being as we actually are. Because who is God? God is that which is shining in us as eye. So we need not concern ourselves about other things. Regarding service, you may say, oh, Kumar's doing so much service, or Michael's doing so much service. Let Michael and Kumar do service. That's no business of ours. Who am I? The I is not doing service. If I think I am doing service, then I'm taking myself to be Michael. That is, I'm getting back into ignorance. I'm doing disservice to Bhagavan then. Because according to Bhagavan, knowing who am I, that is the true service. So if instead of knowing who I am, if I start thinking, I am Michael, I'm doing very good service, I am actually doing disservice to Bhagavan. By rising as an ego and taking myself to be Michael, I am doing a disservice. If Bhagavan wants Michael to do some service, that's his lookout. That's nothing to do with me. We need to separate ourselves from the person we seem to be. We need to give up this abhimanam, this dehabhimanam. I am Michael. I am Ravidai. I am Kumar. That is false. What is true according to Bhagavan? I am I. Nane. Aham. We are nothing other than I. So let us hold on to that I, which is what we actually are, and let the person that we seem to be do whatever it's destined to do. That's nothing to do with us.
Excellent, Michael. Thank you so much. Good
Thank Bhagavan. I'm only repeating I'm just pointing out what Bhagavan has already taught us.
Thank Bhagavan for bringing us this message through you.
Yes.
Through Kumar.
It is so easy for us to slip back into this habit of thinking that we are this person. Our task, the task that Bhagavan has given us, iṟai-paṇi, what he has enjoined on us, is not to identify ourselves with this person, to hold on to I and let this person do whatever it is destined to do. That's no concern of ours.
Yeah, there is actually no conflict. It's only our finite mind that creates this diet.
When we allow our mind to go outwards, the whole world is full of conflict. See how many wars there are, how many disagreements there are. this religion, this politics, that politics. Nobody is agreeing with everyone. Everyone is fighting about everything. Why? Where does it fall? What is the cause of all this conflict out there? We alone are the cause because we look out there. The dream seems to exist only when you look at it. So stop looking at it. Look within.
Thank you.
Turn on the news any day and you'll see endless conflict in this world. Political conflict, conflict between, in so many ways, ending up even in wars and people killing each other and everything. This has been the history of humanity since the beginning of time. But the cause for all this, Bhagavan has detected what is the cause for all this. Ahande undayan, anatam undahum. Ahande indrail, indra-anatam. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. War, peace, hunger, famine, poverty, wealth, all the dyads and triads all come into existence if we rise as ego. So what is the solution? Hold on to I and thereby subside back within.
Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you, Michael. Srikant asks a question. During atma-vicāra, even the act of observing thoughts, there is a subtle doing. Basically, when we are being the truth, will reveal on its own. Is my understanding right?
When we're doing atma-vicāra, we are not observing thoughts. If we're observing thoughts, we're not doing atma-vicāra. Thoughts are all in anatma. We are not to attend to any thought. We are to attend to only to I. Sometimes Bhagavan said, attend to the thought called I. But even, what is a thought called I? That's another name for ego. But even this thought called I, Bhagavan made it clear, what is this thought called I? It is a mixture of chit and jada. I am this body. That is the thought called I. What we are to attend to is not this body, not to the jada portion of ego, only to the chit portion of ego. If we attend to the chit portion of ego, we are not actually attending to a thought. We're attending to the original source from which the first thought ego arose. So we are not to look at any thought. We're not to attend to any thought. As Bhagavan said, what does it matter however many thoughts arise? That doesn't mean we go on looking at thoughts. Oh, Bhagavan said it doesn't matter how many thoughts arise. So let me enjoy all these thoughts. I can be thinking about this. I can be thinking about this. Bhagavan says it doesn't matter. No, that's not what Bhagavan said. Bhagavan said, let us not concern ourselves. Let thoughts arise or let them not arise. What is it to us? Nindrida sendrida ninevida vindre, as he says in the end of verse 6 of Arunachashtakam. Let them appear or let them not appear, then nothing other than you. So our aim is to attend only to I. So after saying that it's in the 6th paragraph of Nana, he says, Etene enengal erinomena. However many thoughts arise, so what? But he doesn't stop there. He says, as and when each thought rises, if one vigilantly, he says, jagrateai, that means vigilantly. If one vigilantly investigates to whom does it rise, it will be clear to me. In other words, we turn our attention away from the thought back towards ourselves. We are not concerned about thoughts. Let them rise or let them not rise. Our aim is not to attend to the thoughts. Our aim is only to attend to ourselves. So if we are still watching thoughts or attending to thoughts, we are not doing self-investigation. If we want to investigate ourselves, stop attending to thoughts, attend to the one to whom all thoughts appear. In other words, to I. Hold on to I. That is self-investigation. Look at thoughts. That is an atma-vicāra, not atma-vicāra. That investigating what is not ourself rather than what is ourself.
So
is
basically,
that answer clear?
Yeah. In the second sentence, he says, the 2 sentences out of the 2 sentences, basically when we are being, the truth will reveal on its own. Is my understanding right?
Yes, that is correct. But how to just be? That we are always being. We cannot not be being. That being is our very nature. But what is required is just being. Summa iṛipadu. Summa means merely be. Merely be. What summa iṛipadu implies is be without doing, be without rising. So how to be without rising? The only way is to attend to ourselves. So long as we're attending to other things, we have to rise to attend to other things. And the very movement of our attention away from ourselves is an action. In order to be, we have to attend to nothing other than being, our own being, I am. That is the way to be. Everything else is in a state of flux. Everything else is doing. Things are constantly changing, all phenomena appearing and disappearing. So long as we're looking outwards, we're not being. We're involving ourselves in doing. In order to just be, we have to look within to our own being and just be what we actually are. And when we be what we actually are, yes, it will reveal itself. Tirambi ahan, turning within. Tane dinamaha kankan, see yourself with the inner eye. Terium, it will be known. It will be known means it will reveal itself to you.
Right. Mary is asking, I feel so inadequate because I still have very strong attachments. I still want to enjoy the fruits of this world. However, I feel it brings only misery. Every time I try to go out, instead of turning within, I suffer. Do you have any advice?
Who is inadequate? It is the I that is aware of itself as I am Mari, who is inadequate. Yes, ego is inadequate. Everyone agrees, even Bhagavan will agree, ego is inadequate. But are you this ego? So long as you're looking outwards, you seem to be Mari, therefore you seem to be ego, because it's only ego that is aware of itself as I am Mari, and therefore you feel inadequate. Yes, the ego is the very nature of ego is to be inadequate. Stop rising as ego. Hold on to I am, but what you actually are, the pure being that you actually are, is never inadequate. It is purna. Paramapurna sat, as Bhagavan says in Upadēśa Undiyār. That is, it is fullness. It is supreme fullness. So there's nothing inadequate about our real nature. There's everything inadequate about ego. So stop rising as ego. How to stop rising as ego? Only by holding on to our being. Our being is not inadequate. This is what you say here. There's a beautiful verse that is very extremely relevant to this. Verse 7 of Arunachala Navamani Malai. That is what Bhagavan has given us in Arunachala Stuti Panchakam. There are so many practical clues for actually living what he taught us, for actually living self-investigation, living self-surrender. So what Bhagavan says in verse 7 is this has to be one of the most beautiful verses of all. Anamalai adiene andavandre aviudal kondai. Anamalai. The very moment of, well, it literally means the very day, but it implies the very moment that you took charge of me, you took my body and soul. Enako kureundo. Is there any single defect or deficiency or inadequacy for me? That is, when he's taken everything, how can we complain? Oh, you've taken my body and soul, but still I'm so inadequate. No, but he's taken everything. It's no longer our concern. If there's any inadequacy, he's taken it all. Leave it all to him. Leave your inadequacies to him. For me, there's nothing, because you've taken everything. Kureyum gunamum nilai enain ivatre. This is a beautiful sentence. That is how Bhagavan has packed so much into this sentence. It is, we can say it is like, there was a children's story written many years ago about Dr. Dolittle. I can't remember much about it, but there was one animal called a push-me-pull-you. It was a llama, that a South African llama with two heads. So this sentence is like a push-me-pull-you because it's got two parts. That is, the middle part belongs to both heads. Kureum gunamum nilaai. That means, kure means deficiencies or anything lacking. Gunam means qualities, all the good things. So all bad things and all good things, nilaai, they don't exist apart from you. And then this middle bit, nilaai, we have to take with the rest of the sentence, nilaai enne nivatrei. Enne means I will not think of these, ivatrei is of these, nilaai, other, but only of you. That is, good and bad qualities, the deficiencies and whatever, everything that we can complain about, and all the good qualities, these don't exist independent of you, right? That other than you, these don't exist. So I will not think of them, but of you alone. So in other words, Bhagavan is giving us teachings here. This is very important teaching. We may be the most inadequate person. We may be the worst of worst sinners. It doesn't matter whether we're a saint or a sinner. It makes no difference whatsoever. We shouldn't be thinking about our saintliness or our sinfulness. We all have a mixture of good and bad. None of us are perfect. None of us are totally perfect. None of us are totally imperfect. But we shouldn't think of our imperfections and perfections. It doesn't matter at all. We should be thinking only of Him, and He is that which is shining in our heart as I. That is the most important thing to remember. That's the key to understanding Aksharamala. That is, Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. So many verses here where Bhagavan is talking about Arunachala, we can interpret it legitimately in two ways. Bhagavan is referring to the hill, to the external form, but he's also emphasizing that external form is what is always shining in us as I. So we can take it as, we can take these verses both as the Anya Bhava and the Ananya Bhava. Both are just woven together seamlessly. So that is it. Bhagavan's verses, particularly this Arunachal Stuti Panchakam, the verses are so deep in meaning, and they can help us in all situations in which we find ourselves in the spiritual path. Because we all feel ourselves inadequate. We all have so many shortcomings. We all so often allowing ourselves to be swayed by our Vishaya Vasanas rather than holding on to I am. So we're all failing. So these verses are such a great support. So then Bhagavan says, after saying that he will not think of these defects and shortcomings, but only of Arunachala, then he says, Ennuire, my life, my soul. That is, Arunachala is the soul of our soul, the life of our life. He is what we actually are. He's our real nature. Ennam eduvo adusevai. Ennam eduvo means whatever you think, or it literally means whatever thought. It implies whatever you think, whatever be your will, it implies. Adusevai, you do that. So you do, whatever be your will, you do that. Whatever be your thought, you do that. Kanne, then he addresses Arunachala as Kanne. Kanne means I. I means this, the organ of sight. So why does he refer to Arunachala as Kanne? We can interpret it in two meanings. One is kan, the physical organ eye. He often uses that as a metaphor for awareness. That is through the eye that we see the world. So the eye becomes the metaphor for awareness. So he can be referring to, when he says Kanne, he can be referring to Arunachala as my own true awareness, the inner awareness that illumines this mind. Kan also means the physical organs. So what is the part of the body which is most dear to us? The eyes. Right? What we treasure more than almost any other part of our body, our eyes. We're ready, if we had to choose between losing our arms and legs or losing our eyesight, I think most of us, our eyes are most precious, because it's through the eyes that we're communicating with the world, we're contacting the world. So what is most precious to us is our eyes. So kanne also is a metaphorical way of saying beloved. That is, Aaron actually is dearer to us than our own eyes, or dearer to Bhagavan than his own eyes. So kanne. And then he says, undran karalineo, your two feet, kadal peruke taruvaye. Just give me only a flood of love for your 2 feet. So you do whatever you will. Your will be done. But only thing I ask is give me ever-increasing love, a flood of ever-surging, ever-increasing love for your 2 feet. What are his 2 feet? His 2 feet are that which is always shining in us as I. So instead of thinking about this person that we seem to be and all the good qualities and bad qualities of this person, we shouldn't think of these at all. He's taken possession of us. He's taken our body and mind. So leave the body and mind to him. Leave all our good qualities and bad qualities, leave them all to him. He can take care of all these things. Our only task is let him do whatever he wants. We should have ever-increasing love to hold on to his feet, which are ever shining in our heart as I. So we are all inadequate. We all fail so many times on this path. It doesn't matter. In fact, failure is absolutely essential. Success, even in worldly endeavors, if you undertake a worldly endeavor, you cannot succeed without first failing many times. That is, if you want to learn to ride a bicycle, you have to be ready to fall off the bicycle many times. If you say, oh, no, I don't want to fall off the bicycle, you will never learn to ride a bicycle. Likewise, in this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we have to fail many times. The road to success is paved with failure. If we never fail, that's because we've never tried. If we never tried, we're never going to succeed. So if we want to succeed, we need to be ready to try and fail again and again and again. The very fact that we are trying is itself progress. Because why are we trying? Because we have a love to know and to be what we actually are. So let us not be discouraged by our failures. Let us be encouraged to try more and more and more. It doesn't matter. Bhagavan never asked us to succeed. He said, attend to yourself. That implies try to attend to yourself. So long as we are trying to attend to ourselves, we are moving in the right direction. So it doesn't matter what inadequacies we have. As Bhagavan says in the 10th paragraph of Nana, however great a sinner one may be, instead of lamenting, oh, I'm such a great sinner, how can I be saved? It is necessary to cling tenaciously to self-investigation. And if one clings tenaciously to self-investigation, one will certainly be reformed, certainly be transformed into what one always actually is. So let us not worry about our inadequacies. If we want to have a competition of inadequacies, I'm sure each one of us is convinced, I will win this competition. I can win this competition hands down. I have more. Nobody can have as many inadequacies as I have. No one can have as little love for this as I have. We will all feel that. But we're all in the same boat. How do we succeed? Let's not worry about our inadequacies. Let us attend only to him. He is ever shining in our heart as I. Let us think of him alone. Let him do whatever he wishes. All we want is more and more love to attend to him in our heart as I.
Thank you, Michael. Sandy Vibhushanan is asking, the first I thought, is it like any other thought? Is it like a mental picture, visual, auditory, sound, or feeling? When does it arise? First thought in the morning or before every thought? Thanks.
the thought, what Bhagavan sometimes referred to as the thought called I, is ego. It is a thought, but it's a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are jada. That is, they have no awareness of their own. Whatever you may think of, or whatever you, by thought, when Bhagavan talks about thought, he uses the term thought in a very broad sense. According to him, the whole world is nothing but thought. Why? Because the whole world is mental. That is, what we call the world is nothing but sights, sounds, that is the five kinds of sense impression: sight, sounds, tactile sensations, tastes and smells. Take away these five and there's no such thing as world. So according to Bhagavan, the world is nothing but these five kinds of sense impression. As he says in verse 6 of Upadēśa, it's nothing else. So the world is entirely, it's just a perceptual image. And perceptual images are mental images. So the whole world is mental. Everything is mental. So according Bhagavan, when Bhagavan talks about thought, what he means by thought is any type of mental phenomena. And all phenomena are mental phenomena, because there's nothing, all phenomena appear only in the mind. So according to Bhagavan, everything other than our real nature, other than the pure awareness I am, is a thought. The thought called I is ego, that which is aware of itself. I think it was Andy who asked this question. So that which is aware of itself as I am Andy, that is ego. Andy is not ego. Andy is the name of a person. The I that is aware of itself as I am Andy, that is ego. That is the thought called I. So the difference, there's a fundamental difference between the thought called I and all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are jada, they're not aware. So nothing other than ourself is aware. So, but ego, the thought called I, is the thought that is aware of all other thoughts. All other thoughts appear only in the view of this first thought I. That's why it's the first thought. That's why Bhagavan says, only after this rises, other thoughts rise. How can any other thought arise without ego? Because they arise only in the view of ego. Without ego, there's no other thought. So ego is there as the background to all thoughts, all other thoughts are objects. Ego is the subject. The thought called I is the subject. It's that which is aware of all other thoughts. So all other thoughts are forms, but ego itself, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Upadēśa, it's a formless phantom. That ego has no form of its own. It cannot come into existence without grasping a form as itself. So when we rise as ego, we take this person, Andy or Michael or whoever, as ourselves. What is this person? It's a body. It consists of five. The person we take ourselves to be consists of five sheaths. That is, there's a physical body, the life that animates this body, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These five constitute the person that we seem to be. This person is not the thought called I. This person is just another thought. It's something perceived by us. That everything about this body is an object perceived by us. The life, the breathing and the heartbeat and all these vital functions, they're all objects perceived by us. The mind, all the perceptions, thoughts, memories, and so on, they're all perceived by us. They're all objects. The intellect, the functioning of the intellect is also perceived by us. The will, which consists of the vasanas, which sprout in the form of likes, dislikes, desires, and attachment, these are all objects seen by us. We are not any of these objects. These are all forms. We are the formless witness. We are that which is aware of all these things. So the thought called I is a thought, but it's fundamentally unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are jada, whereas this is the only thought that is endowed with awareness. Why then is it called a thought? Because we cannot rise as ego without grasping the form of a body as ourself. But body, what Bhagavan means by body is the form of 5 sheep, this person we take ourselves to be. So without grasping the form of a body and taking it to be ourselves, we cannot rise. So ego is the adjunct mixed awareness. That is the fundamental awareness of our own existence. I am is not a thought. But ego is that fundamental awareness mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So as the adjunct meaning this body and this person that we take ourselves to be. So this adjunct mixed awareness, I am Andy, that is ego. That is the thought called I. So you know this thought better than you know it very well. You've been living with it for so long. So other things appear and disappear, but that first thought I, except in sleep or in any other state when mind is completely dissolved, this thought called, so in other words, throughout waking and dream state, who is the dreamer of all dreams? It is only ego. So, and according to Bhagavan, this present state that we now take to be waking is just another dream. So the dreamer of this, the dreamer is the one who experiences it. Andy is not the dreamer. Andy is a part of the dream. The one who is aware of itself as I am Andy, that is the dreamer. That is, whenever we dream, we create in our own mind the dream world, and we take ourselves to be one of the objects in our dream. We take ourselves to be a person in the dream. That's why we see, oh, I'm powerless. How can I have created this whole world? I'm just little me. I'm just little Michael or little Andy. How can I have created this hard world? So we are not Andy or Michael. We have ego, that which has projected all this and which is perceiving it. And which is mistaking itself to be Andy or Michael or whoever. Does that adequately answer your question?
I think so. I think it addresses the question there. So Srikant is asking a question which is a very common misperception there. The question is, in your experience, is self easy than self-investigation? I feel it's very difficult to self-investigate because of the baggage in my mind.
Sorry, is what easy? Is what easier?
So his question is, in your experience, is self-surrender easy than self-investigation?
In my experience, they're one and the same. So you can't, that is, how can we surrender ourselves without attending to ourselves? The nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than ourselves. So the only way to subside and dissolve back into our source, the only way to surrender ourselves is to attend to ourselves. And people think, oh, surrender is very easy. I've surrendered myself to Bhagavan, people say. So long as there's an I that's saying, I have surrendered myself to Bhagavan, our surrender is humbug. We haven't surrendered at all. When that I is no longer rising to say, I have surrendered, that is the state of true surrender. We fool ourselves thinking that just saying, I have surrendered, we have surrendered. Surrender means not rising as ego. If you can remain without rising as ego, that's fine. But how to remain without rising as ego? Only by attending to ourselves. It seems to us to be difficult, but according to Bhagavan, this knowing ourselves is easiest of all things. And of all paths, this is the easiest of all paths, he says in atma-vicāra. Why then does it seem difficult to us? But Bhagavan says it's easy, and we say it's difficult. Who is right? Obviously, Bhagavan is right. Why then does it seem difficult to us? It's not really difficult, but it seems difficult to us. Why is that? Because of our lack of love for it. Because as you say, we have so much mental baggage. That mental baggage is our vishaya vasanas, our inclination, our liking to attend to things other than ourselves, experience things other than ourselves. So because we don't like it, because we're not willing to surrender ourselves, but we cannot attend to ourselves without thereby surrendering ourselves. So unless we're willing to surrender ourselves, we won't be able to attend to ourselves. So it seems to us difficult because of our lack of willingness. We are more interested in attending to other things than we are in attending to ourselves. If you, for instance, when you went to school, there may have been some subjects that interested you a lot. So you never complained that those subjects were difficult because you were interested in them. You wanted to learn more and more and more. There are other subjects you didn't like. And this is so difficult because you're not interested in it. Of course, if something is not interested in it, if you're not interested in something and you're being forced to do it, it'll seem very difficult. But if you've got a love to do it, even the most difficult task becomes easy. But this is actually the easiest of all tasks. It seems difficult because of our lack of true love for it. So what to do? We have to cultivate that love. How to cultivate that love? By trying to practice this path. But I don't have love for it. How? It's a vicious circle, we can say. No, we can start little by little. As Krishna says in Gita, sanai sanai, slowly, slowly, gradually, gradually. Bhagavan has translated that verse in Tamil, mella, mella, gradually, gradually. We've got to withdraw our mind from all other things and fix it on ourselves. That is, doesn't matter how many times we fail, doesn't matter how much mental baggage we have pulling us out. We shouldn't always be swayed by our mental baggage. The mental baggage means the vasanas. Vasanas are just inclinations. It's up to us whether we are swayed by our inclinations or not. We are not bound to follow our inclinations. They're only inclinations after all. So we have to choose. Am I going to follow this inclination to think of something else, or am I going to attend to myself? We've got to try again and again and again. Doesn't matter how many times we fail, we've got to keep on trying. And this is the easiest path, whether we are willing to admit it or not. Bhagavan has said it is the easiest. And what can be easier than attending to ourselves? It seems difficult only because we're more interested in other things.
Thank you, Michael. I think Srikant is happy with your answer and says thank you. And there is an anonymous question here. Let me just read that. There really is no question, which is a comment, but you could elaborate on it. I only know and experience myself as this particular ego, in spite of the suffering it causes, and not as a causeless happiness, which I only hear and read about. Sort of more of a frustration. There's no question there, but if you want to elaborate on it. What the person says is, I only know and experience myself as this particular ego, in spite of the suffering it causes, and not as a causeless happiness, which I only hear and read about.
We identify, that is, ego is that which identifies itself as something other than what it is. But in order to identify ourselves as I am this or I am that, we must be aware I am. So whether ego rises or not, whether we're aware of anything else or not, but one thing we are always aware of is our own existence, I am. So let us not worry about ego. Let us hold on to this I am. Because I am is the root, that is the ground, the foundation, without which there would not be ego. And without ego, there would not be anything else. So let us go back to the source, to the reality. Hold on to this I am. And let ego, the more we hold on to I am, the more ego will drop off.
Right.
So let us not be concerned about ego and all its inadequacies and whatever. Let us hold on to what alone is real. That is I am.
Thank you, Michael. Shohan is saying, please correct me when I say lazy people are best in this path because they hate the doing.
Lazy people also hate making effort. So, yes, Bhagavan has sometimes said that sometimes Bhagavan has praised laziness, but the laziness he's referring to is not the normal worldly laziness, we must have great enthusiasm to hold on to ourselves and thereby not attend to anything else. If we are too lazy even to hold on to ourselves, we are not going to make progress in this path, because the natural flow of the mind is to go outwards. So lazy person may be lying around on the couch watching television all day or doing this, but their attention will be going out, going here and there and everywhere. We need to be so lazy. We need to be too lazy to think of anything other than ourselves. Such laziness is required. Not the laziness where we're too lazy to do actions or even to make an effort to attend to ourselves.
Right. There's a humorous article that David Godman once wrote. This brings it to my mind. He said he spent a lot of time up in the mountains when he first came, but he didn't bother to use the time to attend to himself. They just sat there and just sort of lazied out his time. He says that in his article. And another thing that comes to my mind is the couple of verses that Bhagavan said. He uses the word kurnamadi, nunmadi.
Yes.
So all of that shows that you have to have that enormous focus to attend to yourself. And that's not going to come from laziness, which
exactly.
normally understand it to be.
Bhagavan makes it very clear. We need to be keenly self-attentive.
Right. Those are the questions that I have here. One final comment that I wanted to make is going back to the verse, and you brought out this distinction of the point that you made in the Tamil verse versus in Sanskrit and other versus in other languages. I remember reading Swami Sadhuam's comment, where he said people who give lectures based on on the Sanskrit version, that is Upadēśa Undiyār, should make it a point to read the Tamil version first. Yes. And when I first read that, I didn't quite understand, why is he saying that? Why would he say that? Because they're all coming from Bhagavan, isn't it? But now it's getting more and more clear as you read in depth, particularly in this particular verse. And I'm just looking at all the other three verses, and I don't see that key point that he makes here, which is iṟai-paṇi niṭṛal.
That's not in any of the other languages.
Right. So this is yet another reason why I think we should be owed to ourselves to read good translation, even if you don't know Tamil, to read good translations of Upadēśa Undiyār, and imbibe the meaning there.
Yes. To understand the Sanskrit, it is essential that we understand the Tamil. For example, if you take verse 2, Kriti Mahodado Patanakaranam, the cause for falling in the great ocean of action, Bhagavan says. What is the cause? He doesn't specify there. So that first line is the cause for falling in the great ocean of action. Kriti Mahodado Patanakaranam, that is a sentence. But what is the cause? It's not specified. Then the next sentence is Palamasasvatam, the fruit is impermanent. Gati nirodhakam, liberation obstructing. To understand what Bhagavan is saying here, we need to read the Tamil, because what Bhagavan says in the Tamil version of this verse is, he begins by saying, Vinayam vilevu vilevutru. That means the fruit of action passing away. Why does the fruit of action pass away? When you experience the fruit of an action, that fruit ceases to exist. You can't eat the same fruit twice. You can only eat it once. Once you've consumed it, it's finished. So the fruit of action comes to an end. So the fruit of action is not the problem. What is the problem? Vittai vinay kadal vitidam. As seed, it makes one fall in the ocean of action. So the seed is what makes us, the kriti mahodado patanakaranam is the seed. It's not the fruit, it's the seed. He doesn't mention the seed at all in Sanskrit. It's implied there. So what is the seed? of all actions, it is the vasanas. So the vasanas of a cause of a kriti mahodado patana karanam is referring to the seeds, to the so the seeds of a cause for falling in this ocean of action. The fruit are impermanent. If you could get, if it were not for the seeds, we could just consume all the fruit and the problem would be over. The problem is, so long as there are seeds there, we are made to do the same actions again and again and again. We are accumulating more and more fruit. So in each lifetime, if we are exhausting one lifetime worth of fruit, but we are accumulating 100 lifetimes worth of fruit because of the seeds. That is, seeds always multiply themselves. If you plant a seed, it grows into a tree and produces so many fruit and so many seeds, and more and more and more. So the problem is the seeds of the vasanas. That is made very clear in Tamil. It is not. It is. You have to know the subject in order to understand the Sanskrit properly. If you know the Tamil, then you'll know at once. It's a very beautiful way of saying it. Kriti mahodado patana karanam, the cause for falling in the great ocean of action. Beautifully expressed. What is that cause? You have to refer to the Tamil where Bhagavan says the seed. And what is the seed? It's the vasanas. So long as we rise as ego, we have vasanas. So long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by vasanas, we are doing agamya. So long as we do agamya, we are thereby accumulating fruit. And the result of the agamya is twofold. Not only those actions yield fruit, which get stored in sanchita, they also yield seeds. That is, the more we do something, the more the stronger the seed that prompted us to do that becomes. If supposing you have got a great obsession with some subject, the more you dwell on that subject, the stronger your inclination to dwell on that subject. We can see this. People are passionately interested in all sorts of things. But other people think, what on earth, what interest does this person find in this subject? But for that person, it's the most interesting because they allow their mind to dwell more and more and more on that. It becomes more and more interesting. So whatever vasanas we allow ourselves to be swayed by, those vasanas are thereby being strengthened. So the more we do any action, we are doing whatever actions we do, whatever agamya we do, we are doing under the sway of our vasanas. By allowing ourselves to be swayed by those vasanas, we are strengthening the vasanas. So not only are we creating fruit, we are also strengthening the seeds or creating fresh seeds. Because sometimes an interest in one subject will lead to an interest in another subject. And so we create a new set of seeds. For example, we may want to learn Bhagavan's teachings. But because we want to learn Bhagavan's teachings, we want to learn Tamil because Bhagavan is written in Tamil. So our interest in Bhagavan's teaching creates an interest in Tamil, because we want to read Bhagavan's teaching. So this is just an example, but in this way, seeds are multiplying and they're producing more and more seeds which mutate into other interests. So the seeds of a problem, the seeds of a kriti mahodado patana karanam, the karanam is the seeds. That is why the chittam or anandamaya kosha, the will, is called the karana sarira, because the seeds, the vasanas are the cause for everything. That is, Bhagavan used to say, the whole world is nothing but a projection of our own vasanas. He compared vasanas to the images on a film reel. On a film reel, there are so many static images. When the light shines through those images, it appears as a moving picture on the screen. That moving picture is nothing but a projection of those images on the film reel. So Bhagavan compared the vasanas to the images on a film reel. They are the seeds that appear as all this. So that is why the will is called the Karana Sarira. The Chittam or the Anandamaya Kosha is called Karana Sarira because it's the cause not only of action, but of all knowledge, everything that we experience is the result of, is the sprouting of the vasanas. All our actions are the result of the sprouting of vasanas. So vasanas are the cause. But whose vasanas are they? They're egos. So the root cause is ego. When we rise as ego, we have inclinations to attend to other things. Those inclinations, the vasanas, give rise to everything else. So many very deep, that is that one word in Tamil, vittai, there's so much implication in that word. If we understand the significance of that word in the Tamil version, it makes clear so many other aspects of Bhagavan's teachings become clear. Why does Bhagavan talk so much about Vishaya Vasanas in the 10th and 11th paragraphs of Nana? Because they have a problem. They have a cause for all our problems. Of course, they're not the root cause. The root cause is only ego. But it is the nature of ego to have Vishaya Vasanas. And so long as our Vishaya Vasanas are strong, we won't be willing to surrender ourselves. So we're not willing to turn our attention within. So how to weaken the Vishaya Vasanas? Only by trying to be more and more self-attentive. Because when we are self-attentive, we're thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas, so they become weaker. And only the sat vasana, the inclination just to be as we actually are, that becomes stronger. So there's so much deep meaning in Bhagavan's works. So, and he's expressed that most clearly in the Tamil, in the case of Upadēśa Undiyār, it's most clearly expressed in the Tamil original.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Yes, with that, we will conclude today's session, and next month will be the last verse of Upadēśa Undiyār.
Yeah.
And that's another great verse.
Yeah.
I think it was composed by Muruganar, right? The 30th verse.
He says that is what Bhagavan said. So the idea is Bhagavan's, the composition is Muruganar's.